Okay, routes to independence and routes to change in 7 minutes. Brace yourself. No, I'm actually, just now, I'm almost only talking about routes to change. I've been travelling around the country, talking about the book of ideas and the various things that we can do now, which in the spirit of the campaign that we had will transform Scotland. So catch me in one of those if you really want to. What I'd like to do today is just take 6 or 7 minutes to be a little boring and say there is a specific set of things we have to do. We got into this referendum in a way that nobody really expected. And this is a thing that we forget looking backwards. So 2011, no one thought it was coming in the first half of the year. In the second half of the year, it dawned on us, bloody hell, we're getting a referendum. Now that left very little time for preparation. And much as I am sympathetic to what happened from the SNP and the Scottish Government in setting out the case, because it was a very, very short timescale to answer a lot of questions which an entire generation of Scots interested in politics hadn't been looking at. What would an independent Scotland actually look like and work like? So they did what they could. And the Fiscal Commission report, for example, was a reasonable discussion document, which was probably what could be done in the timescales. But it was short of a plan for a new Scottish currency or for how we would adapt to sterling. You can say the same about pensions, you can say the same about the fiscal situation. And all of these things were crucial, because all of these are questions which relate to how people's lives will be after. And how your life will be after. Will you be okay? Will your family be okay? Is at the heart of giving people the confidence that it's okay to vote yes. And we've still got to keep reminding ourselves that there's probably only about 30% of the Scottish population who are inherently hostile to independence. And so we have to work out, there's 30% that will vote for independence no matter what. We have to work out what we do with the 30% in the middle to give them the confidence to be able to do this. And that is going to require work. We have to put together a proper programme of work to develop answers to the questions which we answered insufficiently. It was correct to say about pensions that when we have an independent Scotland, everyone will keep the same pension entitlement from the UK. That was correct for about 10 or 15 years until the next generation come through, at which point we need a proper plan for how we set up a system which will ensure future generations' pensions. Now, that couldn't be done in the timescales that we had then. It can now. But the timescales are tight, and I really want to emphasise this point. There's been an awful lot of talk about triggers. I've heard people saying, oh, well, this could be a trigger for a referendum, and that could be a trigger for a referendum. And it worries me deeply, because that is inherently a sign of weakness. What you are saying is, we don't know how to get there by ourselves, but perhaps some confluence of external circumstances will come together which will hand it to us. It won't. That's not how we get the next step forward. We have to plan collectively for a future which enables us to not trigger a referendum but decide to hold one. And we need to think about how we get there, how we prepare for that referendum and what comes afterwards. And the tricky thing here is that the next time that we can do this is not far away. In 2021, there will be a Scottish election. That Scottish election can be handled in a whole bunch of ways, but it is absolutely the next best opportunity to get a rock-solid mandate to hold a referendum. We're not relying on a financial crisis or a Brexit or any of these other things. We can go out in various ways to the Scottish people and say, here we go. This is the next chance. If you vote for a referendum or for one of the parties that support a referendum in this election, we can hold it. And I've said before, May election, fast October referendum and out by Christmas. These are practical working strategies that we can work towards. But we've got a lot to do if we're going to do that. We are not moving the polls fast enough. We all know that there's a soft shift, because of what's happening with Osborne and other things, there's a soft shift among a lot of people towards saying, well, you know, maybe it's time to look at this, maybe it's time to look at this. But we're not nudging them into actively supporting this yet. And I've said that we cannot get into another referendum until we are regularly running 60%, and I think 65% in the opinion polls. That is when we should have the confidence to go and do another referendum. We've got to get people there, so we've got to get on with the work. And sorry if the Presbyterian work ethic in me is rather flown out here. There's no time to waste. This is only a few years. We need to get a prospectus for a proper Scottish independence on the table by, for my money, 2019. Then we can have a yes campaign. And I can't emphasise this enough. We don't need a no campaign to have a yes campaign. If we can get a really solid document answering questions about currency, the fiscal situation, the pension situations, and all these other questions, if we can do some good work on that, get it on the table by 2019, we can take 2 years of campaigning. Over these 2 years, if we get it right, I am pretty confident that we can shift public opinion to that 65% point. Then we can get to 2021, and then we can have an election, call a referendum, and get out. If we leave it later than that, if we don't focus on 2021, then circumstances really do take hold. And those circumstances, as well as the financial crisis, which is almost certainly going to come, and the problems that we've got with rising xenophobia across Europe, the problems of austerity, the massive structural problems in the world economy, never mind the advent of the robots, by that time, it's difficult to know where we are. We could have a lackluster SNP who's underperformed. We could have a sense of complete panic about the world and its governance, and that could be the chance. That could be our chance for another referendum gone for a generation. So the question is, how do we get these tasks done? And on this one, I'm going to ask everybody to separate your thinking into two parts. One of these parts, we must be radical. The first part is, if we trot through a dull 5 years of government in this country, patching up, sticky taping the problems that we've got, at the end of it, people are going to look back and they're going to say, well, here we are, where we started. That's not going to be helpful. And so the radicals among us, and those who are believing that we can do more than this, we have to push on a domestic agenda the whole time. It's going to be an SNP government, let's not kid ourselves. We're going to have to find ways to get pressure on them in any way we can to do these kinds of things. But simultaneously, we have to learn, and incidentally, that's what we did in the referendum. We turned the SNP into a different party through what we did. And that was for the good. And I can tell you, in honesty, most of the members of the SNP, the old members of the SNP that I know, were very glad that we did that, because it gave them a party that they've become more proud of. And that's the second half of what we got to do. Remember what we did in Radical Independence. We got a whole bunch of lefties and trots and commies and feminists and trade unionists, and we all got together and barely had a fight in 2 years. Miraculous. That's the second thing we need to remember, because we need to open that outwards. We cannot all go away into our garrets and write plans for a future Scotland based on, as Jim was saying, a lack of understanding of how many oil rigs there are. All come back and say, here we go, we've done it. We must come together and do this collectively. And to do that, we need to find that tolerance and ability to work with people who don't exactly share our views to get forward. Now, I don't want to give too much away because we're still in the middle of, making sure it's all going to work. But we need a forum for bringing everybody back together again. Earlier this year, there were some tentative initial talks of the main people who were organising the Scottish Independence Convention. And we're more or less at the point now where a new constitution is agreed, which will enable it to become a stakeholder organisation which can bring together all the parties and all the groups who are campaigning for independence. We hope that we'll be able to get that together, and talks are happening with SNP, I think, to make sure that they're on board, because we need that. And if we can do that after the Scottish elections, my God, there's so many bloody elections and referendums in Britain these days. Once we get through this election, we can announce properly the launch of a forum which brings RIC and the grassroots campaigns and Women for Independence and the political parties and others back together again. And if we can find a bit of funding to get a couple of officer staff, one to coordinate a campaign and one to coordinate the research that we need to do, then we can set ourselves a proper structure and a proper timetable, not just for talking about why we want independence, but for taking the concrete and solid steps that we need to take if we're going to get there. And so, keep fighting and keep the pressure on the SNP, because it's going to be an SNP government, to be better than their instincts sometimes want them to be, and to take more chances than they might naturally want to take. And in that, yes, stamp your feet and bare your teeth and say, come on, more now. And at the same time, remember the other half of what we were. And remember that if we cannot collectively come together and compromise and negotiate our way to a vision for how we get to this next referendum, then we will drift through the next 5 years without having done the work. And believe me, we don't get there without the work. The work is what makes this happen. And so hopefully, once we get one more election out of the way, we can start to talk once again about a collective plan which draws us together and finds us in that enterprise that we enjoyed so much, envisaging a better world as something real and practical and within our touching distance, and not just the subject of something that we complain about in the pub when we're not feeling happy. This was an absolutely fabulous movement. It is still a number of seriously good movements. If we can connect those back together and we can be serious about what needs to be done, I am absolutely confident that Christmas 2021 is going to take place in an independent Scotland. Thanks.